It was a rainy afternoon when the Johnson family stumbled upon an antique shop tucked away on a quiet street. Among the dusty shelves of old trinkets and forgotten relics, one item there, a porcelain doll with delicate features and hollow eyes. Unaware of its sinister past, they decided to bring it home, thinking it would be a lovely addition to their collection. At first, the doll seemed harmless, sitting quietly on a shelf in the living room. Its glassy eyes seemed to stare into the distance, innocent at first glance. But as the days went by, subtle changes began to occur. The doll's position would shift ever so slightly, its head tilting as if watching something or someone. Small, inexplicable things started happening. Doors creaked open when no one was near them, and objects were found in places they hadn't been left. But it wasn't until the sound started that the true horror began. Soft whispers in the dead of night. Footsteps where there should have been none. And always the doll seemed to be watching, its eyes following every movement in the room. Then the unthinkable happened. One night, as the family sat in the living room, the doll suddenly moved. The porcelain figure slid across the shelf, inching closer to the edge. The parents, in disbelief, rushed to the doll, only to find it sitting perfectly still, no signs of it being touched. They could not explain what they had just witnessed, but something was terribly wrong. The next morning, the family found the doll in a new position on the shelf, but it was the eyes that chilled them to the bone. The eyes, once lifeless, now seemed to follow them. As they walked past, it felt as if the doll's gaze never left them, tracking their every move with unnatural precision. The air in the house grew heavier, thicker, and a sense of dread hung in every corner. It wasn't long before the family uncovered the dark history of the doll. It had once belonged to a young girl, a child who had tragically died under mysterious circumstances. The spirit of the child, it was said, had become bound to the doll, its anger and sorrow trapped within the porcelain figure. And now, the spirit seemed intent on making its presence known. As the days went on, the haunting escalated. The doll became more aggressive. It moved on its own, but not just gently this time. It would slam against walls, fall from shelves with a force that shattered its porcelain limbs. The family was terrified, but they could not bear to leave it behind, unsure of the spirit's power, or what would happen if they did. Desperate, the family decided they had to rid themselves of the cursed doll. But even as they prepared to burn it, the house seemed to fight back. The temperature dropped, windows shattered, and the lights flickered wildly. As they struggled to carry the doll out of the house, they realized it had already claimed its place. Haunting had only just begun. The doll was eventually cast out, buried far away from the house. But the stories of its terror continue to linger, whispers of its malevolent spirit still roaming. Some say it still waits, patiently, for the next family foolish enough to invite it in. The Johnson family thought they had found their dream home. Nestled in the quiet suburbs, it was everything they'd hoped for. Spacious, charming, and full of potential. But what they didn't know was that this house hid a dark, terrifying secret. At first, everything seemed normal. They unpacked their belongings and settled in. But soon they began to notice small things. A door that wouldn't stay shut, objects misplaced or moved, and a chilling draft that swept through the house despite all the windows being closed. It wasn't long before the strange occurrences turned violent. One evening, as they gathered around the dinner table, a glass flew off the counter and shattered on the floor, sending everyone into a state of shock. But the terror had only just begun. In the dead of night, the house began to pulse. The walls seemed to vibrate, as if the very foundation of the home was alive with dark energy. The air grew thick, charged with an unexplainable force, something far beyond the realm of the living. Then came the sounds. The slamming of doors that no one had touched, the flickering of lights, and the unrelenting banging on the walls. The house was no longer a home. It had become a prison, with an unseen malevolent force lurking within every room. Desperate for answers, the family began to dig into the house's history. What they uncovered was chilling. The house had once been the site of a brutal murder. A crime so violent it left behind a lingering, vengeful spirit that still haunted its walls. As they delved deeper into the mystery, the poltergeist grew more powerful. Shadows moved across the walls and whispers echoed through the hallways. The family realized they were not alone, and the spirit was hungry for revenge. In the end, the family had no choice but to flee. The terror had become too much. The house, once a symbol of hope, had turned into a nightmare from which they could never escape. But even as they left, they could feel the spirit following them, its rage never satisfied. To this day, the house stands, abandoned and forsaken, the spirit still lurking within, and anyone who dares to enter will find themselves trapped in a world of terror, haunted by a poltergeist that will never rest until its thirst for vengeance is quenched. It all began innocently enough when the Johnson family brought home an antique porcelain doll from a dusty shop, unaware of its dark history. Soon, strange events began to unfold. Objects moving on their own, the doll's eyes seemingly following them, and an oppressive energy that filled the home. As if that wasn't enough, another family moved into a house with a gruesome past, where violent poltergeist activity escalated. Chairs flying across rooms, whispers in the dark, and a house that seemed alive with malevolent energy. These hauntings, though separate, were not so different. The same restless spirits lurked, waiting to claim their victims. As the doll's eyes gleamed in the darkness and the house shook with unseen forces, the question remained: who would survive the wrath of these vengeful entities, and what price would they pay for disturbing their eternal slumber?